All right, so today we're going to dive into Scrum.
Oh, nice.
You've sent over some materials that suggest you're already pretty familiar with, like agile approaches.
Okay.
So we're going to skip, Scrum 101 and get right to the good stuff.
Awesome.
Our guide for today is the November 2020 edition of the Scrum Guide by Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland.
Right.
It's like the ultimate playbook for doing Scrum, right?
And you know what's interesting is this guide, it's not just for software developers anymore.
Really?
It's been making waves in like all sorts of fields, from marketing to healthcare. Anywhere you've got complex problems that need solving.
That makes sense. From what I'm seeing in your notes, it looks like you're working on a project with a ton of moving parts.
Huh?
So that definitely qualifies as complex.
Yeah.
So the guide keeps kind of hammering home this idea that Scrum is a framework,
Right.
not a rigid set of rules.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean in practice?
Okay, so think of it like this. If traditional project management is like following a recipe step by step,
Yeah.
Scrum is more like being given a set of high-quality ingredients
Okay.
and some guidelines, and then being trusted to experiment and adjust as you go.
I see.
The key is that inspect and adapt loop that they talk about.
Right.
You're constantly checking in, learning, and course correcting.
So it's less about sticking to a rigid plan and more about responding to what you learn along the way. I can already see how that could be super valuable in my line of work.
Yeah.
Where things change constantly.
Absolutely. And that's where those Scrum values that they talk about come into play.
Right.
Things like commitment, focus, openness, respect. And the one that really jumps out at me, courage.
Courage. That seems like a pretty intense word for a project management framework.
Yeah.
What does that even look like in a Scrum team?
It's about being willing to challenge the status quo, to experiment, to admit when you're wrong, even when it's uncomfortable. And from what I'm seeing in your notes, that kind of courage could be a game changer in your current project.
Really?
Especially when it comes to mention a specific challenge from the listener's material.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm already starting to see how this could apply.
Cool.
So let's break down the folks who make up a Scrum team.
Okay.
We've got the developers, the product owner, and the Scrum Master.
Right.
They each have, very specific roles, right?
Absolutely. The developers, they're the ones on the front lines,
Yeah.
turning those ideas into reality.
Uh-huh.
And then you have the product owner who is laser focused on maximizing value.
Okay.
It's not just about checking off features. It's about deeply understanding what the customer really needs.
Right.
And prioritizing accordingly.
That makes a lot of sense, especially in my field where understanding the audience is key.
Yeah.
It's interesting how they describe the product owner as one person, not a committee.
Right.
Why is that so important?
Well, think about it. If you have too many cooks in the kitchen,
Right.
you're going to end up with a dish that tries to please everyone and ends up pleasing no one.
Yeah.
Having a single product owner means there's clear accountability for maximizing value. No more decision by committee or conflicting priorities.
I see.
Based on what you shared, it seems like your project could benefit from having someone in that role who can really champion the customer's needs.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
Good.
So we've got the developers building and the product owners setting the course.
Right.
Where does the Scrum Master fit into all of this?
The Scrum Master is like the guardian of the Scrum process.
Okay.
They're not a traditional manager, more like a coach, a mentor.
Right.
And as the guide puts it, a servant leader.
Servant leader. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. How does that actually work in practice?
Instead of telling people what to do, the Scrum Master focuses on removing obstacles, fostering communication, and making sure everyone understands and lives those Scrum values we talked about.
It's about empowering the team to be their best.
I see.
Think back to that courage we discussed earlier.
Okay.
The Scrum Master plays a key role in creating a safe space where people feel comfortable taking risks.
Right.
And speaking up, even if it means challenging the status quo.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Good.
Now, let's talk about those sprints.
Yeah.
Those time box periods where the magic happens.
Right.
Why are they so important?
They're like the heartbeat of Scrum. Remember that inspect and adapt loop we talked about?
Yeah.
Sprints provide that rhythm, that constant opportunity to check in, see what's working, what's not, and make those course corrections.
Right.
And the guide is very clear about keeping sprints time-boxed.
Okay.
No longer than a month.
Why do you think that is? Well, from my experience, having shorter deadlines can definitely keep you focused.
Right.
And prevent things from dragging on forever.
Exactly. That time box creates a sense of urgency.
And helps the team deliver those valuable increments, those tangible pieces of working product more frequently.
Okay.
And speaking of increments,
Yeah.
let's dig a little deeper into the three main Scrum artifacts.
Yeah.
The product backlog, the sprint backlog, and those increments themselves.
Okay, so the product backlog is basically the master to-do list, right? Everything that needs to get done to create that, awesome product the customer wants.
That's a good starting point.
Okay.
But there's a lot more to it than just a list of features.
Really?
It's a living, breathing document that's constantly being refined and reprioritized as the team learns more.
Huh.
And each item in that backlog should represent a piece of value for the customer.
Right.
Not just a random task.
So it's not just about building stuff.
No.
It's about building the right stuff in the right order to maximize value.
Exactly.
I can definitely see how that mindset could be a game changer, especially in my industry, where mention a specific example from the listener's materials.
Absolutely. And that's where the product owner's expertise comes in.
Right.
Making sure the backlog reflects the customer's needs and the overall product vision.
Okay.
Now, within each sprint, the team pulls a subset of those items from the product backlog.
Yeah.
And creates the sprint backlog.
So the sprint backlog is like a zoomed in view of what's getting tackled in the next, few weeks.
Precisely.
Okay.
And it's not just a static list either.
Oh.
The guide emphasizes that it evolves as the team learns and adapts during the sprint.
I see.
Think back to that turge we talked about.
Right.
If the developers realize something isn't working or they need to adjust their approach, they have the power to do so. In collaboration with product owner, of course.
Right, of course. So it's all about empowering the team to make the best decisions based on what they're learning in real time.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And all of that leads to the creation of those increments.
Right. Those increments are the tangible proof that the team is delivering value. They're not just finishing tasks.
Yeah.
They're creating working pieces of the product that can be tested, inspected, and potentially even shipped to customers.
And each increment has to meet that definition of done, right?
Yeah.
That's like a checklist that ensures everything is up to snuff.
Right.
But it's more than just a quality check, isn't it?
It's about creating a shared understanding of what done truly means.
Right.
Imagine if everyone on the team had a different definition of done.
Yeah.
It would be chaos.
Right.
The definition of done ensures everyone is on the same page, preventing ambiguity and those nasty surprises later down the line.
Okay.
And from what you shared about your work,
Yeah.
it seems like having a clear definition of done could be particularly crucial when mentioning a specific example from the listener's materials.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm starting to see how this all comes together to create a really powerful way of working.
Yeah.
So we've got the team, we've got the backlog, we've got the sprints. I'm ready to unpack those sprint events.
Let's do it. All right, so let's break down those sprint events.
Okay.
We've got four main players.
Right.
Sprint planning, the daily scrum, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective.
Okay, so sprint planning, that's where the team decides what they're going to tackle in the next sprint, right? Seems pretty straightforward.
It's more nuanced than you might think.
Really?
It's not just about picking items from the product backlog and divvying up tasks. It's about understanding the why behind the work.
I see.
The guide emphasizes that the entire Scrum team collaborates to define a sprint goal that aligns with the overall product vision.
So it's about connecting the dots between the day-to-day work and the bigger picture.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see a theme here.
Yeah.
Everything in Scrum seems to tie back to that overarching goal.
Absolutely. And that alignment is crucial
Right.
for keeping the team focused and motivated.
Okay.
Now, the guide also mentioned something interesting about sprint cancellation. Apparently, a sprint can be canceled if the sprint goal becomes obsolete.
Wait, really? I thought once a sprint started,
Yeah.
it was full steam ahead.
That's where Scrum's adaptability comes in.
Right.
Remember, it's all about responding to change if the sprint goal no longer makes sense,
Okay.
perhaps due to a shift in market conditions
Right.
or new information emerges.
Yeah.
The product owner has the authority to call it off.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be very agile to keep chugging along on something that's no longer relevant.
Right.
So once the sprint is planned and everyone's clear on the goal, then what?
That's where the daily Scrum comes in.
Oh.
It's a short 15-minute check-in for the developers to sync up, discuss their progress, and identify any roadblocks.
Right.
Think of it as a mini huddle
Yeah.
to keep everyone on the same page.
From what I'm seeing in your materials, your team is pretty spread out geographically.
Yeah.
I'm guessing the daily scrum is crucial for keeping everyone like connected and informed.
Absolutely.
Even when they're not in the same like physical location.
It's a powerful tool
Right.
for fostering communication and collaboration, regardless of physical proximity. And the guide emphasizes this is for the developers, not a status report to management.
Right.
It's about self-management and accountability.
Okay, so the team's working their way through the sprint, tackling those backlog items, checking in daily, and hopefully making, good progress.
Right.
Then what?
Then comes the sprint review.
Okay.
A chance to showcase what's been accomplished.
Yeah.
And gather feedback from stakeholders.
Right.
But it's not just a presentation.
Oh.
It's a collaborative discussion about what's been learned.
I see.
And what adjustments might be needed
for
the next sprint or beyond.
So it's another opportunity for that inspect and adapt loop to work its magic.
Exactly. And this is where that transparency we talked about earlier comes into play.
Right.
By openly sharing the work. And inviting feedback.
Yeah.
The team can ensure they're building the right thing in the right way.
I see.
And the guide is clear that the sprint review should never be a bottleneck to releasing value.
Right.
If an increment meets the definition of done and is deemed valuable, it can be released before the review.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Speed and agility are key in today's fast-paced world.
Right.
Okay, so we've planned the sprint. We've worked through it, reviewed the results.
Right.
What's the final piece of the puzzle?
The sprint retrospective.
Okay.
It's a time for the team to take a step back, reflect on their process, and identify areas for improvement.
Okay.
Think of it as a continuous improvement workshop.
I see.
What went well? What could have gone better?
Yeah.
What can we do differently next time?
It's like hitting the pause button.
And taking a moment to learn from the experience, both the successes and the stumbles.
Exactly. And those insights feed directly back into the next sprint, creating that continuous improvement loop.
Right.
And remember, this retrospective isn't just about pointing fingers or dwelling on negatives. It's about fostering a culture of open communication and learning where everyone feels safe to share their thoughts and ideas.
Okay, I'm really starting to see how all these pieces fit together to create a really robust and adaptable framework.
Good.
But the guide also mentions that Scrum is purposefully incomplete.
Yeah.
Only defining the parts required to implement Scrum theory.
Right.
What does that even mean?
It means that Scrum isn't meant to be a rigid, prescriptive methodology. It provides the core structure and principles, but it's up to each team to flesh it out and tailor it to their specific needs and context.
I see.
Think of it as a foundation.
On which you can build.
So it's like they're giving you the basic building blocks.
Right.
And then it's up to you to create something amazing with them.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's where those complementary practices and tools we mentioned earlier come in.
Right.
Things like Kanban, user story mapping, and burn down charts can be integrated with Scrum to enhance its effectiveness and tailor it to specific needs.
Speaking of tailoring Scrum, the guide also emphasizes that it can be applied beyond software development, given what you've shared about your work. I'm curious to explore how Scrum could potentially transform your current project.
Let's dive into that.
So we've talked about how Scrum can be, adapted.
Right.
But the guide's also pretty clear that it should be used in its entirety.
Yeah.
No cherry picking allowed. Why is that so important?
Okay. Imagine trying to build a house. Using only half the blueprints.
Right.
You might end up with something that looks like a house.
Yeah.
But it's probably not going to be very structurally sound.
Right.
Scrum is designed to work as a cohesive system, each element supporting the others.
So it's about committing to the whole package, trusting that those Scrum creators knew what they were doing when they put it all together.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean you can't bring in other tools or techniques to enhance your Scrum process. In fact, the guide encourages it. But those additions should complement Scrum, not replace its core elements.
Earlier, we touched on some of those complementary practices, like Kanban, user story mapping, and burn down charts.
Right.
From what you've shared about your work, it sounds like Kanban, in particular, could be a really valuable addition to your toolkit.
It could be a great fit. Think back to what you said about your team.
Okay.
Being geographically dispersed.
Right.
and dealing with a lot of incoming requests.
Yeah.
A Kanban board could help visualize the workflow, limit work in progress, and make those bottlenecks really apparent.
Yeah, I can already see how that visual element could help everyone stay on the same page even when they're miles apart.
Exactly.
It's like having a shared map to navigate that complex project terrain.
Exactly. And that's just one example.
Right.
Depending on your specific challenges and needs,
okay,
you could explore other complementary practices, like user story mapping, to get a clearer picture of the customer journey.
Right.
Or burn down charts to track your sprint progress visually.
This has been incredibly insightful. I'm already starting to see how I could apply these Scrum principles to my own work.
Yeah.
Even though it's not software development.
That's what's so exciting about Scrum.
Right.
It's not limited to a specific industry or type of work. Its principles of transparency, inspection, and adaptation are universally applicable.
Right.
To any situation where teams need to tackle complexity and deliver value.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Scrum Guide, what's one key takeaway you'd like to leave our listener with?
If there's one thing to remember, it's this. Scrum is not a magic bullet.
Right.
But it is a powerful framework for navigating complexity, empowering teams, and delivering value.
Okay.
It requires a commitment to its principles.
Right.
And a willingness to embrace the agile mindset.
Beautifully put. And remember, Scrum is a journey.
It is.
Not a destination.
Right.
It's about continuously learning, adapting, and improving.
Exactly. Embrace the journey, and who knows what amazing things you might create.
That's a fantastic note to end on.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Scrum.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it insightful.
Yeah.
And remember, the Scrum Guide is always there to guide you on your agile journey.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep learning.
Keep learning.
Keep adapting. And keep those sprints rolling.